Monday Morning Matters. Perspectives from Southeast Asia.
Hey, good morning. This is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
Hi, this is Grace.
And of course, you are at our very morning, very early, very Monday Morning Matters. We are at Monday Morning Matters. We bring you perspective about Southeast Asia from Southeast Asia to Southeast Asians. Am I making sense
Arlene.
here?
I think you're a little drunk today.
Monday drunkenness. So anyway, today we're going to talk about something to do with property and assets, but has nothing to do with business. Everything to do with land rights. What exactly is land rights, Gowri and Grace?
Land rights are land rights, Arlene. So this is an issue that we are facing. Of course, it's being faced all over the world, but we are going to focus in the Southeast Asian context, where it is being faced by some of the Indochina countries, and it's a long battle, and seems to also be kind of a losing battle, sadly, for them, because a lot of them are forced to evacuate from their place.
In fact, it's a problem even throughout Southeast Asia. Although it's quite underreported in certain countries like in Malaysia, but it's a reality throughout Southeast Asia. And Indochina countries are the foremost on the headlines when it comes to land grabbing, land rights, how the indigenous land are not being respected by developers and governments alike. So, Grace, do you have problem with land rights in Korea?
Well, Korea is not exactly in the ASEAN region, but I believe that when it comes to land right, it also leads to another discussion to deal with the human rights in certain countries, because land rights, it's not only about the property itself or geographic of structure on the feature of the nation, but it also, like I mentioned, it leads to the human right, because certain community they are actually forced to leave certain areas due to so many regions, and one of it is development of the areas, and perhaps different regions ordered by the high authorities in the nation.
Interesting, very interesting. Gowri, that's not funny. Land rights is human rights, but how can we connect land rights and human rights? Because land is land, right? I mean, you can stay anywhere you want. At least areas that is not within where it's being bought up by developers. But why land is such a big deal that it becomes a human right to have land, either for shelter or as your common land for economic activities and all?
Well, first of all, land, of course, is an economic asset for people. And like you mentioned, we live there and we have the freedom to live anywhere we want, especially for those indigenous people, because back then we didn't have any real estate agent or any broker coming in between. So you find a place and you build your home and you live there. And these people have been usually living there for generations, for more than hundreds of years in some cases. But then again, it seems that even the majority of these people are actually living in places like forest, not like in the center of a city or anything.
Probably you remember in our geography class where some indigenous tribes in Malaysia, they have this slash and burn lifestyle where they go to a virgin forest and then they develop some simple agricultural lifestyle for a while, and then they move on to another land, and they make sure that the previous lands are being developed. Are being grown with trees and plants and all that, so that it will become fertile again. So, yeah, that was my first, my very minimum first exposure about how certain minorities are very nomadic in terms of their lifestyle. And because they are very nomadic, they are unable, under the the current modern law, they are unable to claim that, hey, that's my land, because in modern laws, when you have a land, usually you have been living there for so long, or you have your ancestry heritage within that land itself. So there's a bit of problematic when it comes to defining what exactly is land rights. Of course, you have the very typical sort of story where which happens a lot in Indochina, where the government or developer just simply grab the land, irregardless whether it has a name or history attached to the land or not. But then you have another stories where these nomadic tribes are unable to reclaim their land because they are so nomadic that every places that they live are actually in fact their ancestry home.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because land is also an important symbol of inheritance for people, especially people who live in rural areas. That's usually their source of economy as well. When you look at the families, they always tell you how much land they have and how much agriculture activities that they're doing. They don't boast about other things like car or the bank account and whatnot. And in some cases, it's also a symbol of spirituality, because the land, because it's their rice bowl as well, it's got a very symbolic meaning. Like even in Sabah and Sarawak, we have that when they celebrate the Hari Gowri and all that. Sometimes it's more than just an economic thing. It can also be a religious, a spiritual
cultural,
way
because
of life. Yeah.
Spiritual, religious culture. I think it's important that we define identity of certain tribes or certain society based on their land as well, like indigenous society. For example, I mean, in certain countries, they even have customary law, jurisdiction, and customary land that where they have, the government have to make certain land reform within certain area because of respecting the indigenous lifestyle of that particular society. So in other words, land rights is definitely human rights in a way, especially in referral to communities like the indigenous communities.
And also, how many countries in ASEAN have actually moved forward to be able to confront or to be able to improve these issues when it comes to land right in Southeast Asia is also another story here.
Definitely. When it comes to Southeast Asian, there are in fact calls from certain bodies within certain bodies in that are like NGO bodies that are calling for ASEAN to actually create or to mainstream land rights as human rights in Southeast Asia. If you look at the Human Rights Charter for ASEAN, very little mentioning about land rights. A lot of the information about human rights is mostly about human beings, when it comes to either being abused or being being utilized for certain things, but very rarely about the land itself. So when it comes to ASEAN, I guess we are not sophisticated enough in terms of understanding the extent of human rights for Southeast Asians.
And also, it also regards to the gender problem, because certain countries, they don't allow women to own certain lands. And then one of them is Indonesia, Bali, Nepal, Central India, and also partly in the Laos as well. So women cannot own the land unless they do not marry. On marriage, on her rights to land are lost, and also titles are transferred. So this is just a small example of that regards to human rights when it comes to land right in certain countries.
Talking about women, glad that you mentioned. I mean, we are all women, right?
Yes.
Any doubts about that?
Too obvious of us. Sorry, but my point is, women usually when it comes to human rights, regardless whether it's land rights or whatever rights, the first gender to actually be affected are usually women. The same goes with land rights. You're right to mention that certain countries like Indonesia, they still are a bit backward in terms of inheritance towards women. And in fact, a lot of scholars are arguing that because women lack of sufficient land rights it actually can affect them negatively in terms of their immediate families and larger communities. In fact, if women have the rights for land ownership, they can develop an income and allocate income fairly towards the household because hey, it's women. Anyway, if women do not have a sufficient income, it actually will affect women in terms of becoming victims of domestic violence, or less likely to be educated or having longer schooler days, or less likely to have better access to microcredit, which is the in thing among those who want to have smaller loans for SME businesses.
And also in Asia and in Southeast Asia, we are so used to the patriarchal society where when it comes to women, they are often overlooked their rights, not only in terms of land rights, but most of their other rights as well. It's often overlooked and they have to follow their husband, and they can only not even own what their husband owns, and they will only get a part of it. And when it comes to land rights, of course, women are marginalized in this aspect, and they like you mentioned, they become victims of domestic violence, and they have to focus on their participation in household chores and all. But there's of course been a rise in protests in terms as well, because women also want to have some sort of a property, some asset under their names, and they don't want to just write on what their husbands have.
Guess which country has made that progress?
What? Which country?
India.
Okay, why is
Sorry.
that funny?
No, just sorry, I want to laugh. But yeah, India has made that progress towards equality in land rights, especially under the Hindu Succession Act of 2005. So the act aims to remove gender discrimination, and it is really good because we see India taking the lead. Gowri, Modi has done something right. Oh no, the government before Modi.
And it seems that they have actually came up with this thing where women in India have the legal right to own the land, although very few do it, as I mentioned earlier, because of how they got used to the patriarchal practices.
It's
in
very
the nation.
strong, right? I mean, the patriarchal system in India.
Yeah, even in Malaysia or in other
in
countries.
most of the countries. I'm sure in Korea as well.
Yes. Always look at me when it comes to Korea. But I wanted to bring another issue because we've been talking about a lot on the gender issue here. But when it comes to land rights, we cannot forget about all those developments, especially when it comes to industries such as hydropower plants or even the mining or rubber plantations. All these developments, the industry want to perhaps use all those forests and also certain lands in the countries to be able to go for the more developed nation and so on. And one of them is very well known Bangladesh, and also again Indonesia, and also partially in Laos as well. The lands, certain lands are lost to military and campment as well, and lost to hydro development, and also land is also lost sometimes with the compensation or even without choice of the people who have been living there. So it also faces a lot of land rights in certain countries. But the problem is certain governments, they do not recognize the ownership over this land or forest, and that they don't actually consider of the people who have been living there. Sometimes they look at all those beneficial side of the country to develop more.
There are many reasons. Of course, you have a government that is authoritarian, that is dictatorial, and then you have, for example, the military junta. But at the same time, you have communist government that assume all lands belong to the people, and the people that is narrowly defined as the state. So in communist countries, they define everyone's land as state's ownership in a way, because state is considered the guardians of the people. But at the same time, you have communities that, because their ancestry land are so vague in terms of the ownership and all that. They don't have those kind of paper documents or contract that can prove, oh, they own the land, and some are living very nomadic lifestyle. So, and some are victims of this, I would say, situational victims, meaning that, as I mentioned earlier, they don't have black and white documents to prove they own the land. They might be living a nomadic lifestyle and all, or the government might not be aware of the lifestyle of this sort of people, that they just simply grab the land and assume that, oh, it's for development. So I just give example of Malaysia. A lot of the development that we see now, some of the lands that we see actually might belong to the Orang Asli tribes. For example, behind the curve are actually the tribes, the Orang Asli community living there, and we do not know about it because, they don't make a huge fuss about it either. But in reality, a lot of this marginalized community, especially indigenous community, they live on the edge of the forest, or they live on the edge of civilization that people like us, the middle class, the urban, might not be aware of their existence. Hence, their land are being grabbed without even us noticing it under our nose. But then you talk about development. I think development is the major culprit in all the other areas of creating this issue of land grabbing or breaching land rights. You rightly mentioned about how the development in the energy industry, especially in Indochina, Laos is the major culprit in this case, where the vigorous or the greed for taking advantage of the energy sector has created this society or this government where they only see the profits from the energy, not so much about the local community which are sitting, on the bed of this area where the energy industry is being developed.
And also, they also want to catch up all these developed nations around them. It's also the pressure that the one government is facing, that to be able to meet certain criteria, to be able to become a single market when it comes to ASEAN, the land rights sometimes is mistreated.
Mm-hmm. We will take a short break, but we will continue from your point regarding on how ASEAN see the matters about land rights. Hey, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
Hi, this is Grace.
And you are back again with us at Joanne ASEAN on Monday Morning Matters, where we discuss about land rights in Southeast Asia, the way forward, as well as what exactly is happening here. Talking about land rights, the issues, it's actually quite diverse. Earlier, we mentioned about how Laos is affected mostly by the energy sectors there, where it's affecting the local communities. But in Burma, it's totally a different reality. It's not so much on hydropower or whatever energy energy sectors, but it's mostly about farmers. For example, since the passing of the farmland law in 2012, farmers have been seeking restitution of land seized under the military junta. In the past, the junta consider all lands as theirs. So it's somehow a bit communistic in a way. So in a way, it has left a lot of farmers insecure about their own possession or their own lands. That is probably similar to how the situation in India is or had been previously. So the government recently drafted the national land policy, which will be finalized in 2015. I'm talking about the military government. However, there are fears that it will fail to address historic land grabbing by the ruling elite, that it threatens to dispossess women, and that it will leave thousands of farmers with insecure rights to their land. So in a way, it's quite sad, because considering 65% of Myanmar people are actually in the agricultural sector, believe it or not, it's like Malaysia, but going back probably 100 years ago, where majority of people were farmers at that time. So Grace, what do you think of Southeast Asia? are they strong enough to push forward for a more standardized, I guess, land reforms?
When it comes to Southeast Asia, we still have a lot of rooms to improve for sure. And then when it comes to land right, it's another issue here. But like you mentioned before, Arlene, it's not really highlighted in the one for the discussion when it comes to Southeast Asia issues. We deal a lot of it, the human rights and other issues, but then when it comes to land right, it's not really noticed and also highlighted. So the government really need to come together to be able to come up with certain standardized policies for people to follow, or they need to take the example from other countries how they've actually been improving and also embracing certain people in the areas.
It's really tough when it comes to people who are maybe indigenous people or people who are still practicing agriculture, people, especially people who don't have a good education background, and when they are going against the ruling elite, most of the time they just lose out because they don't know the exact way, they don't know the right way. They need someone in between, somebody to come in and help them and tell them what their rights are, what they can do about it. And going to Cambodia, it seems that although the situation there is very critical, a lot of journalists have actually stepped forward to help these people, to explain to them what land rights are and the ownership of land, and to educate them on what they can actually do to reclaim their lands.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, and mind you, a lot of the Southeast Asian nations still rely heavily on international funders or donors. I think international donors have or can play a major role in terms of addressing the issue of land rights. We see how European Union has become one of the largest donor for ASEAN Secretariat, and I think being the larger donor, they can definitely shift the policy of ASEAN towards more concerning on the issue related to human rights. They actually have been quite an extensive discussion or discourse among European Union and other international donors to put pressure to, especially to authoritarian or militaristic government, to change the way of how they do things, how they see land. Because in reality, a lot of this land issue is actually detrimental to the economy of all these Indochina country. Believe it or not, it is. Because you create this system where only a few people benefit from the economic GDP of the nation, and when only a few people can benefit from it, you cannot have that robust GDP or that transformation towards a high income nation, or at least if that's not the vision of Indochina, at least transformation towards a more equitable society where people can live a better lifestyle, having a larger middle class and all that. I don't think that would happen if the government keep on putting not even giving any attention at all towards the issue related to land grabbing.
But what if the government actually thinks that the other way around? Like, for example, those people who live in the certain area, they're the minority, so they will get the less benefit. But whereas when it comes to development by chopping off the trees or going for the deforestations, it will actually benefit the majority of the nation. That's what the government may be focusing on. So that's what it could be the other way around, how their focuses are.
That's an interesting argument, because I've been actually thinking about it, like, hey, just leave it to the government, they know best. But in reality, I mean, you look at places where, I mean, government are not necessarily rational. That's the thing. If you look our closest neighbor, Kelantan. If you look at Kelantan, almost all of its forests are being chopped off. But doesn't mean that it's the most prosperous or or economically viable state in Malaysia. In fact, it's one of the poorest. So I don't think it necessarily correlate between how the government utilize the economic land or economic activity of the particular state or nation in terms of translating it into better GDP. Maybe I would say Singapore. since Lee Kuan Yew seems have done a lot of things right for its own nation, although he has done a lot of things wrong as well.
But again, it also comes with the size of the nation.
Yeah,
because
the size.
Singapore is pretty small a region, and then with the development, of course, it could have had a shorter time to develop its nation. But Malaysia is way bigger than Singapore.
Yeah, I think I come with the particular school of thought where government is not necessarily the most rational body. So for civil society or for the public in general, it's actually our right to participate in the decision making of governments. They might not have the best interests of society, in fact.
I think this kind of reminds me of my mom and how she forced me to be a doctor because the government thinks that it always knows the best, but like you mentioned earlier, even Grace mentioned, they have a certain way of looking at things. Of course, their priority is always for economic growth and to increase the income of the nation, and in that pursuit they may overlook other important issues like environmental issues, human rights issues, or the fact that these indigenous people were here and they deserve the land more than the corporate companies that want to build shopping malls or whatever. But when the government is looking at it, for them it's more important to have a more collective benefit for the entire country as opposed to just one small community in this particular village. It doesn't really matter to them that much. So when it comes to the government, like what Grace said, they may actually think that that I'm in charge of the country and I know what's best, and I don't need people telling me, who should I give this land to.
Both of you are definitely spot on. I mean, especially Singapore is a small country, so it's easier to manage society or to know where the society is coming from. And especially when you have homogeneous society, then it's even easier. But if you have such a diverse nation, I mean, look at Southeast Asia. It's full of really unique and indigenous tribes. You don't have to go as far as outside of Malaysia, just within Malaysia. Do you know that we have 200 spoken language just within Malaysia, and most of them are from the diverse and unique tribes that we have within Malaysia, and especially in Sabah, Sarawak, and the indigenous tribes in West Malaysia as well. And so in a way, because of the multiculturalism, the diversity that we have in Southeast Asia, it's even tricky. It's even trickier in a sense that to address the problem is not to just address on the ASEAN scale, but also on the national scale and on the local government scale. Because I'm sure Penang government, or maybe in this case your MP from Pulau Tikus, would know you better than probably Prime Minister Najib from the federal government's point of view.
So you're saying that the MP should actually be the one, because he knows the place better, he knows the people better, that he should be the one making the decision.
Yeah, powers
ultimately.
From my point of view, to address the issue is to decentralize the power structure to ensure that there's some form of empowerment among local community to decide whether the land is an indigenous land or the land is free for development. That's the reality that I think Southeast Asian government, like it or not, they have to face it.
But if we look at countries like Malaysia, of course, I'm not saying that it's right what they're doing, but more often than not, when they are claiming a certain land, they always give the people an alternative place to stay. Like, okay, you guys have to leave this place, but there's an apartment here that we can compensate. But if you look at places like Myanmar or Cambodia, they are just forced out of the land and they have absolutely nowhere to go.
Guess where they go? They
jump off a mountain.
They take a boat and they go to Malaysia.
Right, that too. So for these people, they have it much worse, because not only is that their home, most often than not, it's also their source of economy, their monthly paycheck, whatever, it comes from actually being in the land and cultivating plantations around it, or other domestic agricultural activities. So when they are just forced to go out, what actually happens to them? Where do they go? Where do they stay? How do they restart or rebuild their lives again?
It's not that the government or country, they are not aware of all these issues. In fact, they have established certain for example, workshop or conferences regarding all this mainstreaming land rights, as well as also that regards to human rights in ASEAN. And then one of them also was held in the 2014, which was just the last year, to bring up the awareness and also to enforce these land rights in certain countries, and also to discuss about the recommendations to ASEAN, such as to encourage other member states to set up their respective national human rights institutions, also to establish a regional mechanism dealing with the land issues that will actually include to investigate and adjust the complaints from a certain community as well. So they have a certain awarenesses and the practices that are going on, but like we all agreed before, that those issues are not really highlighted in the ASEAN regions.
So Arlene, if you were in Cambodia and you are being forced to leave your home, which your ancestors have lived in for hundreds of years, what will you do?
What would I do? I think it is pretty devastating. It's really hard to say because, because when you have I would assume you have very little education, and your source of income is just from the land, it's hard to be optimistic about life. It's hard to think that, oh, life would be better, or I want to fight for the right of my people. But I think the best way forward is to have civil society and the farmers themselves, stage a protest or fight against the regime that has been taking their lands. And it's funny because in a dark way, it's funny because a lot of the lands that are being taken away from the governments are usually land that they redevelop for commodity crops like oil palm and all that. As we all know, for example, Indonesia has taken over Malaysia as the biggest producer of oil palm. Our palm oil. In a way, it shows that how governments are looking at lands in Southeast Asia. They see it as a market force, or a place where they can produce cheaper materials or more goods and compete with the rest of the underdeveloped world like China and India. I give example of how agriculture businesses has developed into a large-scale land acquisition and focusing too much on commodity crops like palm oil, and these are affecting countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, Cambodia, Burma, and to some extent Timor-Leste as well. It's a very serious issue, land redevelopment into by having more commodity crops and all that. And sorry, what?
I just want to add, what's even worse is that it's not bad enough these people are being evicted out of their homes. When they protest, they actually get jailed for going against the government, because they are not obeying the orders that were given to them. So of course, like you mentioned, some civil society has stepped in, some activists have stepped in to advise them and also to legally represent them. And after they are released, they are still not happy, because they said, why was I jailed in the first place? What did I do wrong? This is my home and you're taking it away. And then I get jailed when I question about it. So it seems that the ruling elite there is using their power, using their influence to actually to try and oppress them, and to just say that basically this is none of my business. I need this land. There are companies coming in that will make us rich. So I just want you to get out.
That's correct. And then well, I'll give you a very good example in Korea as well. Well, the government used to be very forceful towards certain people in a certain area, and they just chased them out of the area that they lived. And of course, Koreans being Koreans, they were really vocal about that issue. However, they ended up in the jail because like you said, they were not really obeying what the government wanted to go with the plan. So what they did was they just put them in the jail. So they lived in the jail for some time while they were developing that area. So which was they treated very unfairly on this matter. But after all, we realized that the people there and also the government realized how unethical they were, so they apologized to the nation. So, but then when it comes to Southeast Asia, like Ali mentioned, the oil palm is one of the biggest industries that Southeast Asia having putting their eyes on. And to be honest, the industry itself has been developing a lot. But then where are all those rights for the people there? And then all those policies regards to land rights in certain countries?
We will answer that after this music.
Monday Morning Matters. Perspectives from Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Hello, this is Gowri.
Hello, welcome back. This is Grace.
And we are back again with our segment on Monday Morning Matters, where today we discuss about land grabbing and land rights in Southeast Asia. So what's the way forward, guys? What ASEAN can do about this? Or should we even focus on ASEAN level, since a lot of people have very much skeptic about how ASEAN deals with the matters of society and especially on human rights?
I think apart from skepticism, another issue is that not a lot of people are aware about this land rights thing that's happening in Indochina, or even in Malaysia itself.
Oh, should I go deeper? Not many people are even aware of ASEAN.
That's true, yes. And therefore it's a bit difficult to relate those two unless we're talking on the government level, the authorities who are actually aware of these issues. And even ASEAN, apparently they do have some laws when it comes to land rights and all. But the first thing here is to actually bring this up, talk about it, and make sure people are aware about what land rights are and how it is actually a hot issue and also a major problem in Indochina, especially in Cambodia.
Definitely. And guess what? 60% of people in Southeast Asia have no clue what is ASEAN. So I think they have a lot of PR work they need to do.
That's very
in a way
sad,
before,
Arlene.
before they even make the claim to institutionalize the issue related to land rights.
But then no matter, okay, it matters, but it's really sad to hear the awareness level of ASEAN itself. But however, when it comes to land rights, well, just as local and the politics, they're all different from country to country. So there has to be a specific actions that needed to improve land governance. But there are also some region-wide actions that can and they also should and also be taken. For example, they should include the building a region-wide process for assessing home and also host country regulations and also social and environmental safeguards, including all this developing regional guidance for managing agriculture investment and also supporting stronger producer association to improve the local farmers that we mentioned before, the negotiating power of the national and regional level, and also with the private actors, and also protecting certain tenure rights like customary rights, including stepping up the recognition of the oldest generation ancestral lands of the people through all the protection measures and also communal titling where it is relevant.
There's a lot of work that ASEAN needs to do.
Yeah, but those are the oldest necessary that they really need to take into consideration.
So do you think Malaysia is ready to call for a land rights law, whatever you call it?
Ready to come up with one?
Yeah.
We
I think they
definitely
should.
It's about time.
Yeah, and also to protect the oldest people there.
Because this is what Najib said. I think a lot of people have quoted him. He said that Malaysia is going to stir ASEAN closer to the people of Southeast Asia to make the institution part of people's daily lives by creating a truly people-centered ASEAN. It's very, very optimistic, but it's also too idealistic that I cannot figure it out how they are able to do that. First of all, ASEAN is an intergovernmental organization. I mean, if you see, whenever they have meetings, it's called it's called ministerial meeting, ASEAN ministerial meeting. So whatever decision making is always at the ministerial level, which is not healthy if you want to have a people-centered ASEAN. And of course, structure. I think if I were to give just one recommendation to ASEAN, it would be to completely change the system of how ASEAN works. Instead of having ministerial meeting, ASEAN summit, or whatever you call the name, why don't you just have a more bottom-up structure, like a parliament, ASEAN parliament, or and ASEAN votes for certain issues. In European Union, they actually ask the people of the country to vote whether they want to be in or out of EU. That's how
it's very systematic.
It's how bottom up has become. I mean, why can't we learn from the good things that EU have? I mean, we don't have to completely copy everything. I'm sure there are some certain things within EU that are a bit too too EU. It's not might not be relevant to ASEAN, but in the ASEAN level, I think we can copy some of the democratic system there.
I think our Prime Minister actually says a lot of things that we don't know if it's actually going to happen or how is he going to actually implement it. But you are right, he did say that it's going to be a people-centric ASEAN. That's what it was part of his speech during the handover dinner. But then again, how he's going to do it is completely a different story, because we are not even able to solve our own problems here yet.
He's a victim of E. coli, okay? He was a victim of E. coli, so he did something right,
yes,
I
he
guess.
went to visit the flood victims. The flood is actually a good example of how we are not even able to handle our own problems. The flood is a recurring thing which everyone has been angry about, because it's about time that we prevent instead of just coming up with solutions for the problem.
I have to say something. You're right about it. And in fact, I think if the same kind of problem were to happen in other countries like Korea, for example, I think there would probably be a revolution.
Yeah, they'll be throwing chairs and tables at people.
Yeah, for sure.
They'll be saying a lot of curse words, not just on the social media, but also in public in front of the Prime Minister or President.
They will, and that they can be very persistent to get what they want to get from the government.
So I think the second source of problem is maybe people in Southeast Asia, especially the middle class urban, are too comfortable, in our own seat, that we don't care about, the poor farmers in some Indochina land, or even in our backyard, people outside of the urban district, like in KL or Penang.
Absolutely. I think we've become very laid back, very complacent. Like, some of us have become too comfortable with our lives. As much as we are concerned about the flood victims, a lot of us are still here and our lives go on as normal, and because of that, we don't pressure the government as much as we should. And that goes for everything, for land rights, for floods, for whatever issue that needs to be addressed in the country. We should never be so laid back and like,
Let's
this
throw tables and chairs, Gowri.
Let's throw tables and chairs.
Well, instead of doing that, the Malaysian being very reserved people, they actually approached their own way to address this issue. For example, they actually made a film out of this. The title is called Rumah Noor, and it was a land rights test for Malaysia. So it's around a half an hour film where it was a collaborative effort by the Borneo Project, which is an organization, and the community of Rumah Noor, Sabah, and over several months in the 2006 and 2007, and there was also a few years back, and it was made to the possible with the support from the Threshold Foundation and the Borneo Project members. members. It was also this film was released to protect the traditional farms and orchard and primary forest resource from the industrial pulp plantation authorized by the Sarawak state government without the due process of law or compensation.
I think it happens a lot in Sabah Sarawak. Also in certain areas in Peninsular Malaysia. I remember a few years back there's this one documentary called Hak Dinafikan, or translated into English would be Your Rights Are Being Denied. The story goes about how these very few pockets of orang asli settlements in very remote areas within Pahang and all that, their lands were being grabbed and being used for development in those areas, and nobody actually cared about it until nobody even know about it until they actually made a documentary about it. And the fact that these orang asli villages are so sparsely disconnected within the larger civilized society in the urban areas that the authorities can simply bribe them with very simple stuff like just like with food, basic food like cooking
Is it
oil,
their way of
rice
compensating?
I think
Yeah.
when you are poor, I mean I don't blame the orang asli because when you are poor, when you are desperate, you will think about your stomach first than anything else. I mean there's no such thing as human rights when the first thing that come to your mind is you want what's for lunch or what's for dinner, which is nothing, right? So I don't blame them for accepting the bribe, but I blame the government officials or anyone that are actually performing those kind of bribery acts.
I think it's all about being proactive because like we were talking about earlier, Malaysians, we tend to be very complacent, we tend to be very grateful, which is a good thing, of course. Should always be grateful for what you have. But then again, when the government does something very small and then they are going to glorify it. They're like, oh look, we went here and we gave this, we gave that. Yeah, like that's all great, but what are you going to do to prevent this thing from happening again, as opposed to just showing up and giving some aid and all. So at the end of the day, it's about looking at it from a bigger point of view. How can we prevent this instead of how to make sure just to keep people happy for a little bit now.
If you see the collaboration here, majority of the land grabbing issue or land rights issue, I mean, of course, the minority of the issue is the lack of transparency of the government or the carelessness of the government in handling the understanding of customary land rights and all that. But I think the bigger portion of how or why this is happening in the first place is because of development. I guess if ASEAN were to be a successful regional group, it has to redefine what it means to be a developed region or to be a more successful region. Does it mean to have more vigorous development, to have a larger chunk of the market to serve the global community, or is it supposed to ensure that there's adequate or basic lifestyle where everyone is happy within Southeast Asia? I guess when it comes to happiness, it's not something that is part of the Southeast Asian value system, or is it even?
But I always find it's really hard to find the balance between the people's rights and also what the government really wants to do. So perhaps this case, it's always we always live with a lot of questions of a native customary land rights here, and also the development of the one nation that the government really wants to guide the one nation to be able to meet to become one of the developed nations in ASEAN. So it's the balancing between these two. If one fails, definitely the other will go wrong for sure.
Gowri is speechless.
Or perhaps Malaysia should come up with more film production.
I think so. Well, usually that is the most effective way to get your message across, because like you mentioned, people didn't know about the situation until they saw the documentary. And I'll probably just repeat myself and say that at the end of the day, the solution is to prevent things like this from happening. Even
how?
with the land rights, first of all is to create more awareness, because the more people know about this, the more they talk about it, the more awareness there is, then they can push, whether it's within the country itself or for ASEAN to do it, because it doesn't matter who does it eventually. Even people from Malaysia can push for it. Indonesians can push for it, because at the end of the day, Cambodia is our neighbor, and other countries are our neighbor as well. And we want to ensure a regional peace and harmony. And we want every citizen in every country to be treated with respect and be given their basic rights.
Mm-hmm. What about you? What's the kind of solution do you think we should have for ASEAN?
The solution that I've always mentioned,
Throw chairs and tables. No, just
throw the
kidding.
chairs and
Yes.
tables. That could
Just
be one
kidding.
of them, being violent, because
One of the
definitely the government will hear them out. Oh my God, they are becoming so violent and vocal. What's going on? However, I think the right solution here is that people they shouldn't just be quiet about the issues they're having. It's also the people, they have to really be persistent and they believe what their rights are.
In other words, be a Korean.
If that works, if that helps you solve the problem.
Just kidding about it, but yeah, you need to be persistent, and of course, from Gowri's point of view, you need to have greater awareness and don't just sit in your comfortable middle class privilege. But from my point of view, which I totally agree with both of them, I just want to add another one more, which is I think at the end of the day, I think besides society, governments and corporation play a major role. So redefining what capitalism is all about, what market is all about, trying to have a more balanced sort of economic development would be should be the way forward for ASEAN. That's all from us today. Thanks for listening to our Monday Morning Matters. We will continue next week with more discussion. But before that, I just want to say have a nice day and have a great day. That's all from me, Arlene.
This is Gowri.
And this is Grace.
See you tomorrow.